Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the LitRPG podcast. I am Ramon Mejia. I'm here to bring you the latest LitRPG news, reviews, and of course author interviews. This week I have 6 new reviews for you folks at home, but before we begin, I want to give a quick shout out to Nolan Ongoy for his donation to the podcast via PayPal. Thank you very much, Nolan, for your support in keeping the podcast free and ad-free and free to everybody. Thank you. The reviews that we're doing this week are going to include Scamps and Scoundrels by Eric Ugland. It's a new series in the Bad Guy book series. Also, Street Cultivation. After that, it'll be The World's Strongest Wizard Becomes Manaless, a fantasy LitRPG series, Volume 1. After that, it will be Forever Online, Episode 1. Then it'll be Olympus Online, Book 1 Hero. And last but not least, The Forsaken God, Realms, Book 5. Not a 1 again. It's just, this time it's a 5. An epic LitRPG series. It's a 5th book in that series. But before we begin, of course, I want to go into LitRPG news. And in LitRPG news, we're going to begin with a quick sale announcement. Nier Shinofin has put his entire Alpha World series on sale between August the 18th and September the 8th. I know this is a little later than the 18th, but the sale's going on all the way until September the 8th, so plenty of opportunities to buy his stuff on sale. If you haven't read them, you should. They're all very entertaining. If you haven't bought them, this is your chance to get them on the cheap, which also allows you to sometimes purchase the audiobooks at a discounted rate. So keep that in mind. So the author, I'm sure, appreciates it. But here's the sales list. Not everything's going to be on sale at the exact same time. It's going to go book by book every couple of days, essentially. The book 1 in the series, Gamer for Life, is going to be available for sale from August the 18th to the 21st. So by the time most people watch it, that's already passed. Book 2, however, it will be on sale from August 21st to the 24th. Book 3, the 24th to the 27th. Book 4, August 27th to the 30th. Book 5, August 30th to September the 2nd. Book 6 will be available on sale September the 2nd to the 5th. And of course, Book 7, the latest in the series, will be on sale from September the 5th to the 8th. So all kinds of great deals for you folks. And these sales are essentially usually at 99 cents. So you'll be saving quite a few bucks. So nice bit of deals there. We'll have a link in the show notes for the series page on Amazon so you can see what exactly is on sale at any particular time. Okay, next bit of news. James Hunter and Dakota Grout are doing a giveaway contest to help promote their co-authored book, Bibliomancer. The book is still in the pre-order phase. It doesn't go on sale until September. This book, however, will not be on Kindle Unlimited. And there's a very specific reason that the authors are trying to do that. They actually have a goal of getting a bestseller status on the New York Times list and also on the USA Today. It's useful for authors who are also publishers to have this kind of recognition. But to do that, they have to go wide, which means that they can't just publish exclusively on Amazon. They have to publish on a much wider range. And so they're publishing on a bunch of places. They have a link to Books to Read, where it shows all the different platforms that this particular novel is going to be available. But again, they need your support. So if you could pre-order, that'll really help them to kind of push up those sales numbers. So hopefully they'll be able to get on that bestseller list. And of course, to incentivize this, they're going to do a giveaway where they're giving away t-shirts, signed books, audiobooks, and both these guys have tons of books and they have huge followings and fans. So if you're a fan, this is your chance to get merch from them, audiobook codes, actual signed physical books. Just go pre-order and you'll be entered into that particular contest. All the links and all the rules, of course, are at the link at the bottom of this particular article. Or you can go to their Facebook pages and probably find the same information there. But we'll have a link in the show notes to the actual contest page for you guys to go check it out. But basically, pre-order, and look, you get it added to that particular contest. Okay, on to stuff that is out now. This is stuff I have not read. It has come out recently. That includes the 3rd book in the Chronicles of Her series called A Mage Champion. Also, the 6th book in the Ruins of Rimnar series. The 3rd book in the Firebrand series called The Path of the Blood Phoenix. This is that side series from Reading Online. Also, the 3rd book in the Dungeon World series. Book number 5, Insomnia Online, called Distortion, is out for you to enjoy. The second book in the Clockwork series, The Return by Nathan Valerio. This one's actually is a really long time coming. Like the author published this, I want to say years ago, on the Royal Road. Eventually it came to Amazon, and then it's a huge gap time between then and this second book in this particular series. So it is out though. Also out as a short story is going to be Clearman Present Ranger, a Caverns and Creatures story written by Robert Bevan. Always a hilarious series and writer. Very much potty humor, cursing, poop jokes, that kind of stuff, though. So just be aware of that. Okay, and that's the last bit of new LitRPG releases that I could find this week for you folks. On to new audiobooks. There were only a couple. The first one is The Realm Between, book number 3, The Adventurers Guild, and also Death Awoken, Death God System, book number 1. Both are out as an audiobook for you folks to enjoy. Okay, on to upcoming LitRPG. This is where I just read out a bunch of stuff that's going to be coming out in the near future. There are a few new entries to this list, of course, so pay attention if you want to know how to manage the books that are coming out in the near future. We have August the 30th, A Check for a Billion, the third and final book in the Galacticon series. Then we have Zones of Alacria, would be out on August 31st. Also on the 31st, it'll be Darkness Named, Darkness Online, book number 1. We'll see how that turns out. And then it'll be Endless Fantasy Online on August the 31st. The sixth book, wow, that's already book 6 in the Adventures on Brad series. Man, I had to catch up on that series. The Forest Silence by Tao Wong. The first book in the World of Kark series. The second book in the Iron Dragonheart series, Iron will be out on September the 5th. Now, there's actually a slight update to this particular story. This book was actually already supposed to be out as we recorded this podcast, but there was an issue with the pre-order system, and the pre-order got canceled. It's as simple as that. So the author had to put up an entirely new pre-order, which means all the pre-orders he had got canceled, and so now it's scheduled for September the 5th. So if you had a pre-order with this particular book and you wanted to read it as soon as it came out, you might have to go pre-order it again. They should have refunded you when they canceled your original pre-order, though. So there you go. On September the 6th, it'll be Cliffs of Eldamar, book 2 in the Kazarian Online series. On September the 8th, Gamer for Love, Alpha World, book number 8 will be out. Look, just in time for that sale to end. It's like it's been scheduled that way. The first book in the World 99 series, a new series by Dan Serganoff, will be out on September the 9th. On September 10th, it'll be Gloominess, book number 2, called Plus 2. The book we were talking about before. September the 17th, it'll be Bibliomancer, which is a co-authored novel set in the Completionist Chronicles universe, which is Dakota Crowd series, but it's written by James Hunter and Dakota Crowd. So you'll get both of them on the same project. So yay for fans. On September the 10th, it'll be Skulls of Atlantis. September the 30th, it'll be Shadow Sun Rebellion, which is the third book in the Shadow Sun series. So not that far off, to be honest. So that's I almost feel like the second book just came out and I enjoyed it immensely. So I'm looking forward to reading book number 3 in this one. Sometime in September, it's supposed to be First On, book number 2. This one is new to the list as well. Ferried, the fourth book in the Monsters, Maces, and Magic series, out on October the 1st, 2019. October 3rd, Quest for Power, book number 2. October the 3rd, Varnoth, the Black Blade, book number 2. So that one is by Lovell Jackson, who does the Lit Reroll podcast, I think it's called. Sorry if I'm getting that wrong, man. But that'll be out on October the 3rd for his particular series. This cover art looks a lot better than number 1, and I'll give it a shot. On October the 6th, it'll be Dungeons of the Gods, Legends Online, book number 2. This one is also new to the list. October the 16th, Dungeon Dive, a little bit short story by Rohan Vinder. The second book in the Bad Day series will be out on October the 17th, called Second Story Man. On October 17th, it'll be Universe, ICS, Keymaster, Little Bitty Series, book number 2. This is... You would have no connection to the first book in this series just based on the cover or the title. But it's that cover art where it looked like it was like this black and whitish looking thing with a mage and some other guy, same author, you can look it up. But the second book in that series is out. I had to look it up because I didn't recognize it. October 21st, Dead Man's Retinue, the third book in the NPC's Path series. New to the list is going to be November the 1st, A Dark Path, Grimdark LitRPG, Forsaken Talents, book number 1. The second book in the World of Chronic series will be out on November the 4th. So there you go. And Interworld Network book number 2 out on November the 7th, called Avatar of Light. And also, actually, the same author, Anton Emilov. It looks like he's translating a bunch of his series and his novels at the same time. We actually have multiple books from him coming out within months of each other. This one is called The Last Time Loop, book number 1. He's also the author of this one here, The World of Kark, books 1 and 2, which you have on the list. And I believe is also the author of Hero of Champions series, which is, I think, the third book came out recently. So looks like a lot of the Russian authors are, getting their stuff translated at this point. So good. I think that's entertaining. Okay, on to new releases and reviews, though. And first up for the week is going to be Scamps and Scoundrels, a LitRPG Gamelit adventure, The Bad Guys, book number 1, written by Eric Ugland. This story is 446 pages, $4.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. Just yesterday, Ben was a neckbeard wee with a weakness for Red Bull and tendies. Today, he's got a new name, a new face, and a new body, and he's watching the Galacton City Guard fight a 20-foot-tall ooze that crawled forth from the sewers. Tomorrow, he'll need to find a guild to join, save a girl, steal a crown, and most importantly, convince an innkeeper about the gloriousness of chicken fingers. So there we go. Full disclosure, I received an advance copy for review. I purchased a copy when it became available. So the review portion of this, I'm a big fan of Eric Ugland's other series, the LitRPG series called the Good Guy series. I haven't read every single book. It's gotten close to getting like 8 out of 10 several times for me. And so I kind of had high expectations for this story because it's from the same author, set in the same universe. Unfortunately, I didn't connect with this as well as I did the other series. And part of that is probably I had high expectations. So anything that I didn't meet was probably going to feel a little disappointing. And this one did feel a little disappointing for me personally. But again, part of that is because I was such a big fan of, I am a big fan of that other series. From this series title, though, Scamps and Scoundrels and the Bad Guy, series book title, I was expecting the story to be about bad guys, oddly enough. Instead, the story is mostly about a kind-hearted thief that doesn't do a whole lot of stealing for most of this book. And there were just a few things that I couldn't help comparing this novel to the one that I already knew that I liked. And that's, whether you think that's fair or not, it's by the same series, by the same author, set in the same world. And so I was expecting a love of some similarities. One of the things I really loved about the first book in the Good Guy series is that sense of discovery as the main character learns about the RPG world. In this novel, that isn't here, like, at all, in any way, shape, or form. There's a really huge info dump in the first half of the story, not even the first half, first quarter, where the main character essentially gets told everything, and he doesn't earn any of the knowledge he's receiving. And he actually gets a ton of advantages, from a place to stay, to equipment, to items he can sell for quick gold, and so he's automatically really rich. And even introduced to the world of rogues, thieves, and assassins, their entire network. And so he gets a huge number of advantages that he doesn't actually earn in this story. And that was one of the things that just didn't appeal to me. Because in LitRPG in general, one of the things that personally that I've always really enjoyed is like that progression of power, that earning of a power structure. And while some of that's here with the main character earning levels from fighting monsters and stuff and doing some quests, he gets such a big boost that a lot of that power and all the things that he earns later on feels cheapened because it feels like he didn't earn them in a way, like almost like his journey was paid to play to a certain degree. Yes, everything makes sense in the story, how he got everything. For the most part, I'll get into that in a second. But it was just one of those things that just didn't appeal to me, kind of lowered my enjoyment of the story. And it also felt very rushed in the industry. And part of that maybe the fact that the author is kind of counting on people coming into this series having read the other one. So like maybe he feels like they don't need such a long introduction into like the game world anymore. And that may very well be the case. It's definitely a story choice, and the author has total right to do that. I'm just saying it it was one of those things that I saw as a contrast between these two series, where this one didn't quite work for me because of that. Also, in game mechanics on the side of thing, everything on the game mechanics side is very much in line with what has already been set up with the story world from the Good Guy series. So that's all pretty much fine. The only thing I kind of got annoyed with was the fact that there is a respawn system in this world, and the main character doesn't die. So I'm like, oh, that's interesting, because it's one of those. It exists here. And I was just surprised that he didn't die even once. Even in like the other series, the main character at least dies occasionally because he loses. And so that doesn't exist here, unfortunately. It's just one of those like small little things like, oh, that would have made it feel like you're connecting to that series again. And just one of those little things that made this feel a little more fantasy-esque instead of like LitRPG. Other than that, the author does a good job of fleshing out the city stuff. That's one of the things I've always enjoyed about Alpha's writing, is how much lore he gives, or how much he weaves it into the story to make the place and the setting and the people feel more real. And he definitely does that here. So good kudos to the author on that side. However, I just never really connected to the main character. I've already mentioned a couple of the reasons why. Another kind of big reason for me was the fact that this entire series, premise of the series has always been people in tough situations are getting a chance to change who they are and to kind of create a new life. That was definitely a big theme in the Good Guy series. One of the things that I think a lot of readers connect with, the ability to go to a new world, to be a completely different person, and have the opportunity to grow in an RPG fashion and whatever you want to. And instead of that being the case here, the main character essentially chooses to be exactly the same person. He's a thief in real life. It's not a spoiler, it's in the novel description. But, did I read the novel description? I might have. Oh yeah, I did. Okay, sorry, I couldn't remember for a second. But the main character is a thief in real life in our world, and when he gets a chance to go to this other world, he still becomes a thief. He's a rogue, and he automatically has a bunch of like great thief skills that he doesn't earn RPG wise. And he's the exact same person. And so I think it was a missed opportunity to be a different kind of character. Again, that's a story choice, but it made it harder for me to essentially connect with this character because he's not really changing. The person he is in our world is the exact same person he is by the end of the first book in this particular story. He doesn't actually change personality wise. He doesn't have any kind of growth in that respect. And so I'm like, oh, that's definitely trace, but he also isn't really a bad guy, which is one of the things I was expecting from the title of the series, which is, the bad guy books. So I'm like, oh, there are no bad guys for the main character. It's like almost expecting a villain story, and that was one of the things that expectations just weren't met, and so it just kind of lowered my enjoyment of the series, or the book, I should say. Overall, while the second half of the story was a bit more entertaining, there's a little more action in there. I was just a little disappointed by the story. And again, these are really just things about me and my expectations for the story, and it's just enough to kind of push me below good for me. The writing is still fine, action is good, world building is good. It's just that I had expectations for it. I'd hoped to connect more with the story and love it as much as I did the Good Guy series, and I just didn't, unfortunately. So for me, it's going to get a 6 out of 10. I do plan to read book number 2, and I hope that it improves and that I enjoy it more. I'm a fan of the author's writing, so I have good expectations for it. But this one just didn't connect for me. So that's what it is. So that's Scamps Scoundrels, a LitRPG Gamelit adventure, the Bad Guy book series, book number 1, with a score of 6 out of 10. And next we have Street Cultivation by Sarah Lynn. It's called, here it is, 607 pages, $2.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. In the modern world, key is money. The days of traveling martial artists and mountaintop masters are over. Power is controlled by corporations, modernized martial arts sects, and governments. Those at the bottom of the society struggle as second-class citizens in a world in which power is a commodity. Rick is a young fighter in this world. He doesn't dream of immortality or becoming the strongest, just of building a better life for himself and his sister who suffers from a spiritual illness. Unfortunately, life isn't that easy. So there you go. Actually, those are all the main points in world building stuff. So good novel description. This is from the author of the new Gamelit series, which is another LitRPG series that I really enjoyed. And it is a series of the Street Cultivation, rather, is a series that Val describes as 80% cultivation, 20% LitRPG. And I think that's actually a very nice way to describe this. It is mostly a cultivation series, but there are RPG aspects in how the cultivation is done and quantified and people's levels. So there's a quantified system here. How good that system is a different issue, but it does exist, and there are gains in power. There's a power progression system that's clearly noted in item descriptions and character page descriptions and all that good stuff. So this is LitRPG, but again, it mostly revolves around cultivation, which is a very interesting mix. So not every cultivation series is going to be LitRPG. A lot of them generally aren't. But there are some that are specifically written by usually LitRPG authors who are like, oh, I can kind of combine these things too and hit both audiences, and a lot of people really seem to enjoy it, as is the case with this particular story. The story is a cultivation story set in a modern world where a person's power, position, and status are tied to how much. Now in this story, it's not called key; it's called lucrium. So that's a different distinction. But even the author's like, I had to call it key in the novel just because other people won't know what I'm talking about. But there's a specific progression system in the story that is custom made, which some people might have issues with. The plot is fairly slice of life with several conflicts, but it's mostly about the main character, again, trying to make a living while his cultivation attempts are being siphoned off by his sister, who has a unique ailment. It transitions into a tournament fighting and class warfare storyline to a degree. And, of course, like good personal training and development, which is always a key aspect of cultivation stories, and of course many LitRPG stories as well. The game mechanics are seen fairly regularly, but again, this is a custom system, so there are going to be custom rules, custom resource pools, but there are also familiar things like notifications, character stat sheets, rankings, lucrium generation level. So there are going to be things that are familiar to you. If you've ever read anything LitRPG related, you're like, oh, those things, I can kind of maybe make sense of them. But one of the issues for me, of course, was the fact that the story kind of lacks a foundational explanation of how this custom system and how this cultivation works in this world. The story explains this on a need-to-know basis as the story goes on. Like, if things come up, the author's like, oh, by the way, here's an explanation in the story of this thing I might have showed you 5 or 6 other times because it hasn't come up in general conversation or like an actual part of the story. I'm not telling you about it until now, or sometimes it'll appear as a new thing entirely on both the character's status page or in the conversation. Like, oh, I've never heard of this before, but apparently it's a thing now. And that kind of left me feeling like the progression system was a bit ungrounded sometimes, or a little, I want to say made up as it goes along, but that's kind of the impression I got from that system sometimes in the story. Although I also want to point out, though, that the author in her story explains every term, every idea in an appendix in the back. She even makes a note in the beginning of the story saying, my readers have had like mixed feelings about the way that the system is explained. So if you don't mind the explain on as it goes along, just read the story, but you can also just read the appendix at the back, and that might help you out. And I honestly wish I had done that, because it might have made the story feel a little more, the system feel a little more grounded for me, but that's me. Outside of that slight bit of frustration for me, though, the story is pretty fine. It, again, slice of life. There are some good martial arts scenes. The cultivation is nice. It's, again, I like the modern setting of it. The story is probably stretched out a little more than it needs to at 607 pages. But other than that, it's nice. It has a nice, full, satisfying ending, some nice character development stuff. I especially like the plot line between the main character and his sister. That's probably my favorite storyline in this novel. I like the story. I don't like it quite as much as the new Gamelit series for me, but that one's strictly LitRPG. But this is nice, and I think you'll like it if you like Cultivation and LitRPG. So here we go. For me, it gets a score of 7.1 out of 10. That's Street Cultivation by Sarah Lynn with a score of 7.1 out of 10. And next we have The World's Strongest Wizard Becomes Manaless, a fantasy LitRPG series, Volume 1, written by Dennis Jode, I think it is. 203 pages, $2.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. And here's the author's description. In a world where mana means unparalleled power, Zephyr Chronis sits comfortably at his peak. Granted the title of the Grand Wizard at a young age, Zephyr has always been the genius everyone fears and respects. However, some things are about to change when he acquires a cursed sword artifact, the Ruler's Blade. Suddenly devoid of any mana, Zephyr could only hope to rely on his mediocre physical ability. The future looked bleak, but not with the Ruler's Blade's power at hand. Reached damage threshold, stamina increased. Reached speed threshold, ability increased. I can actually become stronger with this? So there you go. And the last note is that the series, the title, which is shortened to TWSWMBM, is a fantasy literature series. So there you go. Okay. Honestly, that reading that novel description was probably the most fun I had with this entire story. The title kind of says it all. The world's strongest wizard becomes Manaless. That's the setup. No hidden artifacts there. No hidden storylines. There's a very brief and I'll grant an efficient introduction into the world and the way the RPG stuff works. After that, the main character is simply just like the strongest magician. There you go. He finds a sword. He takes all his mana, replaces it with the basic interface with a better one that allows him to upgrade his stats and leveling and increase stats through use. And there's no other sword like it. The trade-off, of course, is that he has no more mana to cast spells. So he's a wizard without spells anymore. So he has to kind of shift how he experiences the world. After that, there's some training in increasing his stats, including multi-year jumps in the story where it's just like, oh, and 5 years later, he's super strong. And then there's like one good fight in the novel. There's some other mediocre storyline about the main character trying to get revenge for being a former slave and an evil duke, but it's not really particularly good. It's just kind of an excuse to get the main character to fight. Overall, other than that one little fight in the middle of the story's structure is very simple. It actually reminded me a lot of a children's story, and they have a very simplistic setup, one real point of conflict, and that's kind of it. It's not a terrible story. It isn't. It was very predictable, however. And though it is LitRPG because it has ranks and stats and levels, that's not really a major feature of the story. The game mechanics aren't a big feature. It's more along a line of just a way to describe how overpowered the main character is and some other characters. And again, there's not really much else to the story. So that's it. I basically just got bored because there's not much to this. So it's the world's strongest wizard becomes Manaless, a fantasy literature series, volume 1, with the score of 5 out of 10 because I just got bored reading it. And next we have Forever Online, episode 1, uploaded. Forever Online literature saga written by Chip Munster. It is 59 pages. It's a short story, folks. It is 99 cents. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. And here's the author's description. Maybe putting everything in the hands of machines hadn't been a good idea after all, but it was too late to cry now. We, the gamers, needed to act. Gone are the days when gamers are shunned and despised. Humanity is now facing a threat that defies comprehension, and the only chance to stop it is to get everyone hooked up to a virtual game. A game where rules are rich and complex and only the best can find a path to victory. The name of the game, Forever Online. So there you go. This is the first episode in a planned short story serial series. And I'll be honest, it's off to a rocky start. I'm one of those few people I think in the community who actually like short stories. I love the like nugget fashion of like, I can just pop in a bunch of these and I don't have to commit like hours or days of my time to reading a story that can be either good or really bad. And they're usually not expensive and they're not expensive in time or cost usually. And so I actually like short stories, especially the LitRPG ones. And this one just didn't work. And I think this one makes a mistake of having a planned series for the story, but making the first episode of the first book just set up. And I've seen this before when an author has a whole planned series that have this big storyline. And what they're essentially doing is having a larger novel and just cutting it up. And that just doesn't work as far as like making good little short stories because it feels like that's what it is. Like it feels like it's the beginning of a story where you would normally get your setup, but then it just ends and nothing really happens. That's almost exactly what happens here. There's virtually nothing to this first episode except setting up the premise, setting up the game mechanics, and the beginning of the game, when you're getting in the game world. The premise in itself doesn't really make sense to me. It's essentially set up in this kind of almost dystopian concept of like the world is being destroyed. There's this alien interface system, and humans are trying to beat it by connecting gamers' minds to this network where they're supposed to attack and process and try to hack the system. But to the gamers, they're just going to play a game, and that's the premise of getting the main character into the story. I don't think it's needed, but it is there. It exists. I'm sure there's some plan for some series plot line. But it takes up a huge amount of this already short story. Like it takes up 25% of this novel just to explain that particular setup. Then there's another 25% that's just explaining game mechanics, and character creation setup. And the information there is completely not needed because again, the main character, even though he's given a bunch of choices, he chooses to be human and he chooses his exact same name. So he's essentially himself. And so all that information is for the reader, but it's like stuff you're not using now. And so there's really no kind of point to again. It's just eating up space. And the last half the story just drops the main character into the game with this high-minded storyline that doesn't really matter because again, nothing's really going to happen here. He gets a quest and it's magically solved. And I mean, literally magically, like in the story it's described as, oh, you need to get to this place. It's really super far away from you. And then a few minutes later, oh, magically you're transported there with no effort on the main character's part. So I'm like, it's just like, it's frustrating. It's like nothing really happens in the story. Overall, again, it's lots of setup. Nothing really happens. I was super bored with it. I might give episode 2 a chance just to be fair. Maybe it improves. That's happened to me sometimes before as well. And again, it's a short story, so I don't feel like I'm devoting a huge amount of time into like giving it a shot. So, but for me, this first episode, just boring. Gets a score of 5 out of 10. That's Forever Online, episode 1, uploaded with the score of 5 out of 10. And next we have Olympus Online, Book 1, Hero, written by W. Bourne. It is 223 pages, $2.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited, and here's the author's description. Earl was a salesman living in a post-World War III Earth. All work was done by AI-controlled robots, allowing people to do whatever they wanted, which was the problem. Apathy was the prevailing attitude now, and no one was motivated to do anything. Earl was hoping that the new MMO coming out, Olympus Online, would provide a distraction. Earl was right. Entering Olympus Online was better than anything else he had ever experienced, but from the start, it seemed that there was another agenda at work. What had he stumbled into? So there you go. And just from the cover on this novel, you might think it's a romance novel, or like it's not. There's no romance in here. Well, there's a slight romance arc, but there's no like sex or anything. It's just regular romancy stuff. But the novel is not very raw. It's not a romance novel. So this is surprisingly turned out to be a decently written LitRPG story. Not amazing by any means, but it actually did some interesting stuff. It actually exceeded my expectations based upon the first 25% of the story. Getting into it, I was like, oh, I wasn't sure how good this was going to be, whether it's actually going to be LitRPG. But it is. It actually turned out much better than I thought it was going to be. So again, not amazing, but it's entertaining and good. The beginning of the story describes a future world where most jobs are taken by AI and robots. It's actually a well-described section, and I actually enjoy the speculation and the believability of that speculation, and that AI is developed. They started controlling robots, which displaced human workers, and there's quite a bit of effort from the author in describing this future world and why humanity seems to be on the decline because everything is taken over by AI and robots, and everybody's on universal basic income, so they don't actually have to work if they don't need to. The main character himself is one of the few exceptions that he still has a job where he travels, and so he's still working as a salesman in the story. And there's also like this, I don't know if it's reasonable setup for why he would quit that job, even if it's like one of the few ones left for humans, but he does, and he agrees to spend 6 months in a full immersion game rather. What did annoy me was the fact that there's a good chunk of the story there that does all the setup for this real world, and then it doesn't matter because the main character never returns to the real world. That's never mentioned again in the entire story. Like for the rest of the series, I'd expect that the main character does stay in the virtual world entirely. That may have made it the case, but at least for this story, once he enters that virtual world, he's there. He's just there forever. He never leaves. He never even thinks about the world for the most part. And so all that setup just kind of felt like, oh, it doesn't really matter to the show. It might be like a series arc that comes into play, but for now it's just like, oh, that was 13% that didn't matter. So it is what it is. Once the game actually starts, it actually turns into a slice of life action adventure story with some minor survivalist aspects that disappear as soon as the main character meets other people. But there is lots of action that's pretty well described, quests from gods, and that's kind of it. And that's okay. This is very much, again, a slice of life story where there's not really like a plot yet. Like there's potentially a setup for a plot with some described antagonists, a few hints at some nefarious background figures. But again, it really just is mostly, oh, the main character is sent as an hour to this world, according to like the game storyline. And he plays it up and he does his role-playing speeches, speaking to like the Greek gods and the other Greek characters. And there's a Greek themed about monsters and quests and all that kind of stuff. And even love interest. And that's probably going to be the biggest sell. Like the thing that makes it feel a little different from other stories. And then it's not like this Tolkien-esque world. It's going to be this Greek themed world. And there is a bit of character development. If you're familiar with the Greek mythology at all, you're probably going to enjoy the little nods to different characters and different people from those Greek mythology. And that's probably the biggest sell for you. On the game mechanics side, it's kind of a mixed bag. And this is probably why it's not getting a better score for me. I still had a good time with it. Gets to seven something out of 10. But the game mechanics just definitely drew it down a little because not that they're not throughout the story, but I feel like they're not. The numbers have issues, and that's always going to be a thing for me in particular. The game mechanics eventually become important to the story, but at the beginning of the story, they were left out and for a sense of realism. I think as the story progressed, the author kind of decided to change how the game mechanics were going to be applied in the story. I feel like in a couple of respects, the initial premise or that thought process for the story was that this was going to be like almost like a Portal fantasy story where the main character has one life and he lives there and, you know, everything's super real and the game mechanics are really light. But eventually as the story progressed past that point, it became very much more gamey in that there's a user interface suddenly and there's health and stamina and a rage meter and special powers that the main character has, and combat and levels and everything, all that exists eventually and becomes like an important part of the core story. But there is almost this tonal shift from like the very beginning of it to that other portion of it. This is also again indicated by the fact that there are a couple places in the story where it feels like there's a contradiction on what kind of game this is going to be. In the setup portion of the novel, the game is described as the main character going to this new world and having one life. And that's all he's going to get. But when the game actually starts, he discovers there's a respawn system. And again, that's one of those things I feel like, oh, the kind of core setup for this novel eventually shifted from one thing to another. And that happens sometimes, and it does. But it is noticeable. Another issue in the story for me, just in particular, was the fact that some of the numbers didn't matter. And this was especially the case with the stats. The main character gets its stats. He gets strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, and some other stats. And he gets a 0 in intelligence. And it doesn't only matter the story, the fact that he has a 0 in intelligence. Everything else starts out with a 1. And every single level that he gets, I think, 1 to 2 stat points per most of these stats here. And unfortunately, they just don't seem to matter in particular. Him having a 0 doesn't seem to matter to his character and what he can do. And his stats going from 1 to 30, which is again at 30 times what his initial score was, doesn't seem to really have an effect. And it's never really described what that effect is supposed to be. There's one tiny, I think, sentence in the story, late in the story, that tries to describe it, but it doesn't really show in the actual story. You would think if you had a 30-fold increase in your strength, you'd be 30 times stronger. And that's just not the case. It doesn't really seem to have any impact. And again, part of this is also the fact that those impacts might be in the background for the author on his notes and on his Excel sheet, but it's not shown to the reader, which is a little weird because there are actually damage notifications for when the main character gets hurt, but there's no damage notification for what damage he does. And I'm guessing that's intentional because it's kind of a hassle to keep track of and to do math on Excel sheets. And some authors just rather not deal with it, and that's fine. But again, it's one of those things that makes those numbers just feel meaningless. The other game mechanics in the story absolutely have an impact. Like I said, you have a UI. The authors, the main character very much has a gamer mindset. Like, oh well, I'm trying to figure out how much experience points I need my next level, how many monsters I have to kill based upon what they're giving me, and he's planning out his progression path, and he's planning out his figuring out the game system to maximize it. All that gamer stuff actually exists, and the other kind of game mechanics in the story again do apply. There are item descriptions, there are character stat pages, which there are too many of those. Like one every chapter was too much, especially when there weren't changes in the story. But that's another point. But it just a few things didn't seem to matter to me. So there it is. Overall, once I accepted the stats didn't matter, I enjoyed the story. Like I said, the slice of life portion of it, nicely done. The Greek theme thing was well researched. He fleshed out the characters a little more, not so much the game world. And again, the author does set up some antagonists for the series. They don't really do much in this story other than show up as like maybe mini bosses. But I could see some setup for a larger series that was taking place. I'm like, okay, that's nice to see that the author has a plan for other series. But again, I liked it, but I also like slice of life stories where characters just kind of go in and do stuff, and you enjoy the RPG progression or the storyline or the character. I'm that kind of reader. So if you are as well and you like Greek themed stuff, you might enjoy this as well. For me, I did. It gets a score of 7.2 out of 10. That's Olympus Online, book number 1 hero, with a score of 7.2 out of 10. And next we have The Forsaken God, The Realms, Book 5, an epic LitRPG series written by C.M. Carney. It is 476 pages, $3.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. And here's the author's description. The Realms continue in this epic sequel to the bestseller Borrow, King and Scourge of Souls. We could end this war before it begins. Griff thought freeing his sister Bryn from the shackles of the High God would be the end of his mission, only to learn it was just the beginning. Tasked with building an army for the resistance, Griff quickly realizes it will never be enough to curb the High God's despotic quest to control the realms. Victory seems hopeless. But then, a long-buried secret resurfaces and a desperate plan is hatched. The survival of the realms is in Griff's hands. If he fails, billions of souls will suffer a fate worse than death. Can Griff uncover the mystery of this past life in time to save the realms, or will his actions hand victory to the High God? There you go. This is the beginning of the next arc in the series. This is book number 5 in the series. And so this sets up the big villains for the arc, the Chaos Lords. They're the big bads. However, that's only kind of teased here. Most of the story is devoted to a smaller story where Griff and his group search for the forgotten god who may know how to remove a god's power. Only Griff's group isn't the only one searching for this god and the power, and the first one to find him was going to win the conflict between the High Gods and Griff. The novel continues to bring in new magic, new companions, new interesting stories. There's good action, a more intimate story. Some places in this series got really epic, like big, like hundreds of thousands of people big, and thankfully that was hard for me to enjoy personally. This is a much more intimate story. It's really just the main character and his group of characters, and so I can remember everybody's name and who's in this group, and it's always like if I can't remember everybody's name, it's probably too big of a cast for me personally. But this one is again a lot more intimate, so I could care about each character. I could see what they're developing, and I like that about this particular story. There's also some nice twists in the storyline that were really well done. Overall, I had a good time with it. There's one small annoyance I think that was just on a technical level. Like there is a ton of RPG mechanics and character progression stuff and pages of ability and level options all together in one shot. And it's with the introduction of a new character, a new pet character. And it was so kind of squished together in one place that it took up like 5% of this novel. And this is not a small novel. This is almost 500 pages. And so that it's a pretty significant chunk of, in one section that I was like, oh, this is a lot even for me. And I love that kind of stuff. So that small little note. Overall though, entertaining read. I enjoyed it. I look forward to reading the next book. Gets a score 7.3 out of 10. That's The Forsaken God, The Realms, book number 5. an epic LitRPG series with a score of 7.3 out of 10. Oddly enough, the novel with just about the highest score of the episode. So there you go. And that's it, folks. That's the show. Thank you very much for listening, for watching. Remember, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Patreon, on our webpage at litrpgpodcast.com, where we have all the backlog catalog of reviews and a searchable database for you guys to look through to see if there's anything you like, including tags on each story for common traits like harem or not harem, or action adventure, or female protagonist, or city building, town building, whatever the case. Like the tags are, they help organize things quite a bit for me, and hopefully for you as well. Remember, you can also visit a bunch of other Facebook pages where LitRPG authors and fans commingle and have a good time, including LitRPG Books, LitRPG Society, the Fantasy Nation, and also Spoiled Rotten Readers. They don't have a custom Facebook tag, but I wanted to make sure you included in them. They're at the bottom of that list, so go enjoy all those particular groups. And of course, you want to support the podcast in any way, shape, or form, help to keep the show going, help to keep it ad-free and free to everybody every single week. You can find out all the ways to support the podcast at litrpgpodcast.com/support. And again, folks, thank you very much for taking the time to listen to me, to hang out with me today as I talk about this genre that I love, LitRPG. That seems to be the core of my life, and I'm married and I have kids, or one kid, and this still seems to be how I spend the majority of my time every week because I enjoy it so much. And until we can hang out again, ladies and gentlemen, remember to go read some LitRPG. Goodbye, everybody.